Hello and welcome to EPG Pathshala. This is Stuti Goswami, and now we are going to discuss Module 19, which is United Nations, Peacekeeping and Women. Now, the basic objective of this module is to critically examine the pros and cons of women peacekeepers in conflict areas in different parts of the world. Women have a very important role to play when it comes to peacekeeping and peacebuilding activities in conflict and war zones. The United Nations, since its inception in the year 1945, has played the central role in ameliorating the suffering of victims of conflict, particularly armed conflict and unrest, whether war, ethnic strife, insurgency or terrorism. Since 1945, there have been more than 1 million men and women engaged in different parts of the world as peacekeepers. Most importantly, it is the personal or human relation that peacekeepers of the United Nations forge with people affected by war, conflict or warlike situations that go a long way in restoring peace and in instilling faith and stability and security in the lives and minds of the victims of violence and conflict. However, for a very long time, discussions and deliberations on United Nations peacekeeping forces have focused on male peacekeepers. Although it is undeniable that women peacekeepers have a very important role to play in peacekeeping activities.
In 1948, the United Nations Truce Supervision Organization, UNTSO, was created to observe and maintain a ceasefire, which marked the end of hostilities between Israel and the Arab League. It was the first UN peacekeeping operation in the world. Currently, there are some 16 peacekeeping missions scattered across the globe. More than ever before, women are signing up to serve as United Nations peacekeepers. In 2007, the first all-female battalion was dispatched to Liberia by the Indian government to assist this African nation in maintaining peace and security. Now their term has come to an end, and they're preparing to return to India. After 9 years of service, they'll be leaving a lasting legacy behind in Liberia.
To inspiring Liberian women, to encourage them to join those entities, those operations that protect the nation. For that, we'll always be grateful.
Following in their footsteps are the Mongolian female peacekeepers who were dispatched to South Sudan last year to help keep the peace and offer protection to women and girls displaced by the ongoing conflict. But the work was challenging for these brave women who found themselves thousands of miles away from home in a foreign land. Nevertheless, Lieutenant Erdine Ochir El Chinkerlu and her team continue to give medical assistance whenever needed, especially to women and children.
I am a woman and I am a mother and I am a peacekeeper's woman, and so I'm really proud of my peacekeeper's job.
In fact, it was as late as 1995 in the Beijing Platform for Action that 3 references were made to women and peacekeeping, and those 3 references were just fleeting ones. It was only in the year 2000, in the Windhoek Declaration and Namibia Plan of Action, that deliberations on women's roles as peacekeepers and peace builders gained importance and elaboration. This was followed in the year 2002 by the historic Resolution 1325 adopted by the United Nations Security Council. Gradually, gender sensitivity vis-à-vis peacekeeping operations and peace-building activities has been increasingly witnessed in the deployment of gender specialists in the United Nations mission in Kosovo, UNMK, in the United Nations Transitional Authority in East Timor, UNTAET, and in Sierra Leone, UNAMSIL, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo in the year 2000. This indicates at the increasing participation of women in the United Nations peacekeeping activities. However, it is also a fact that the current figures still fall short of the requisite numbers. Like we have mentioned in an earlier module, we have scope to believe that this number and these figures are only going to increase with time. Again, it is a fact, and this has been touched upon in a previous module, how women peacekeepers have a very important role to play in peacekeeping and peace-building activities. The United Nations has, through the UN Women and UN peacekeeping missions, sought to help women of various age groups affected by conflict in rehabilitation programs, as well as through advice and guidance on such issues as post-traumatic stress disorder, impregnation, sexually transmitted diseases, among others. It is also important to note that without adequately understanding the problems and the needs that are peculiar to women, gender-related issues in conflict zones can never be effectively addressed. The United Nations Resolution 1325 is highly significant in this context. In fact, after this resolution, there have been several other resolutions too that have together sought to increase the role that women play in peacekeeping activities. Resolution 1612 in the year 2005, Resolution 1674 in the year 2006, Resolution 1889 in the year 2009, Resolution 1820 and Resolution 1828 in the year 2008. Now together these resolutions have played three significant roles in this context. Firstly, it has underlined the importance of addressing and controlling sexual violence and exploitation of women trapped in conflict zones. Secondly, these resolutions have also underlined the importance of participation of women peacekeepers at various diplomatic and decision-making levels. Thirdly, these resolutions have also sought to increase the number and the extent of participation of women in peacekeeping. Now, before we proceed, I think it is important to dwell a little upon some of the aspects or points pertaining to the United Nations Resolution 1325. Firstly, member states were urged to increase representation of women at all decision-making levels in national, international, and regional institutions. Secondly, the Secretary General of the United Nations was urged to appoint more female representatives as special envoys and special representatives. Thirdly, the member states were urged to expand the area of activity of women in peacekeeping operations, particularly in field-based operations. Fourthly, this resolution urged and requested the Secretary General to provide the member states with training guidelines and materials on protections, needs, and rights of women. Fifthly, the member states were urged to increase their voluntary, technical, logistical, and financial support to peacekeeping operations in different parts of the world. Now, there were a few resolutions that were also adopted by the Security Council of the United Nations on behalf of the member states. And a few of them are as follows. Firstly, to take appropriate measures to protect civilians affected by conflict, particularly children and women. Secondly, to increase awareness and responsiveness of the United Nations peacekeeping troops in preventing sexual violence in conflict areas. Thirdly, to increase the number of female peacekeepers in peacekeeping units. Fourthly, to improve women's participation in nation-building processes. Fifthly, to implement the Security Council's Resolution 1325 through national action plans or national level strategies. Of course, there are other resolutions also, but these are some of the important ones. Now, let us discuss a little about the presence of women in United Nations peacekeeping operations. Now, the presence of women peacekeepers is significant because it instills trust, faith, and courage much more easily in women and children affected by violence and armed conflict. This is true not only in the context of armed conflict, but particularly in the context of women and girls scarred by violence during armed conflict. In August 2009, the Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, launched a campaign to ensure that there were 20% women peacekeepers in the police units by 2014. However, this target could not be achieved. And yet, the mere fact that this campaign was launched is significant in itself. On the 30th of January 2007, a 103-strong all-women unit from India arrived at Liberia as part of the United Nations mission in Liberia. Now, this contingent from India was the first such all-women unit deployed in the history of the United Nations, and it was led by the Deputy Inspector General of the Central Reserve Police Force in Chandigarh Union Territory, Seema Tundia.
Indian female policewomen pick up their weapons at their fortified base in Congo Town. All peacekeepers in this unit are female. In their country far away from Liberia, they are an elite force for crowd control. Here, Chief Operational Officer Mamta Singh explains some of their duties.
When we landed here, the first assignment we got was security of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs building, which is also the office of the President of Liberia. Apart from that, that is a 24 hours rotation duty which we have. Apart from that, we always have everyday night patrol, that is mobile as well as foot patrolling. That foot patrol is with Liberian National Police and police officers from different countries.
Singh says just like men, female peacekeepers have to be physically and mentally fit.
There is no differentiation between that the Indian FPU being a female will perform only this, or the male FPU, the Jordanians or Nepalese will perform this. We are performing the same duty. It's an FPU. The only difference is that it is fully female. So the duties wise, we have no difference. But I have come to know that by seeing us here, the Liberian women are definitely getting motivated. More and more women are coming to join the police force. So we are also a motivational factor for the women who are here.
Most Liberians agree it would be nice if female Indian peacekeepers paved the way for more security in Liberia with a female touch, like this Monrovia woman, Angie Kablay.
Soldiers will be able to stand for the women and the children of the country and the nation. They are not too aggressive as the men.
For now, the majority male Liberian police force needs all the help it can get in stamping its authority. On the Indian-patrolled side of the capital, things seem much more under control. Indian peacekeepers say this has been an easy assignment so far, and if they help in promoting female opportunities, they say Liberia will be better for it as well.
Today, there are two more such all-women units. One is the Bangladeshi unit at Haiti, and the other is the Bangladeshi unit at the Democratic Republic of Congo. In the year 2012, 30% of the 7,500 international civilians working as part of peacekeeping operations worldwide were women. In the year 2013, more than 50% of the peace agreements that were signed in different parts of the world had references to women, peace and security. In the year 2013, in the month of February, UN Women in India and the Center for United Nations Peacekeeping, or CUNPK, organized a summit in New Delhi. The summit was Women in Peace Building, and it saw the participation of 100 women peacekeepers, peace mediators, senior government officials and officials of the United Nations. In the month of September the same year, a two-day special training was organized by the Center for United Nations Peacekeeping and UN Women again. Now, this two-day training was aimed at educating women peacekeeping units in tackling sexual assault and cases of sexual violence and exploitation in different war-affected and conflict-affected zones. Now, this training was attended by about 56 officers from 16 different countries.
Well, the military is a patriarchy, a more powerful patriarchy than the one that we see in society.
As a woman peacekeeper, I have a better access to the community. I have a better access to the women and the children who are majorly subjected to these violence and attacks.
We still underestimate the role of female military women in the mission.
This special female military officers course that we're piloting today in collaboration with CUNPK in India should serve as a groundbreaking example.
United Nations as an organization of peacekeeping, it has seen a loophole in saying as much as we deploy men, as much as we're achieving, there is still a loophole. And the only way to fill this loophole is to get female soldiers in.
Personally, I feel that this is a course which has afforded me the opportunity to share my perceptions, my experiences with other females from different parts of the world.
I could learn properly the use of rules of engagement, the use of mandates, principles of peacekeeping operation.
We have to try to lift up the survivors of sexualized violence and honor them by paying attention, by caring enough to bring their suffering to an end, by telling them that we do not accept the violence against them. That's our main mission there.
What action will you take as a peacekeeper?
Through community outreach, we build relationships between us and the locals.
The focus of this course is also on protection of civilians, especially women and children, from violence, simply because it has been our experience that victims of sexual violence and children, and even in some cases men, open up to females far more easily than they would to a men.
This two-day training program, however, is not an isolated instance, because in different parts of the world, the UN Women and the Department of Peacekeeping Operations, or DPKO, has been organizing, particularly in recent times, training programs and workshops of this sort in order to sensitize people about handling cases of sexual assault and sexual violence and exploitation as part of peacekeeping operations. In 2009, the United Nations Police Division launched a global effort to recruit more female officers into national police services and consequently into the United Nations police operations worldwide. In the year 2013, the Departments of Field Support, Peacekeeping Operations and Political Affairs undertook a project called Bridging the Civilian Gap in Peace Operation. Now, this project was intended to understand those problems that thwart the increase in the number of female staff in the field-based operations or in various peacekeeping missions and operations worldwide. However, it is significant to note that despite several efforts being made, the highest number of women engaged in peacekeeping activities and operations are in civilian capacities. In the month of May in the year 2014, Major General Christine Lund of Norway became the first female force commander of UN peacekeeping operations in Cyprus. Now, this was a historic moment because for the first time, a female officer was made the commander of the peacekeeping forces in a UN mission. However, it is also important to remember that Major General Lund's appointment has been an exception rather than a norm. And yet, this particular appointment was seen as a manifestation of the historic Resolution 1325 of the United Nations. Now we come to this question of why is a greater role of women needed, or the need of the hour, in UN peacekeeping operations. Of course, this has been touched upon earlier too. However, in this we can pinpoint three major reasons. Firstly, the fact that most women engaged in peacekeeping activities worldwide are in civilian and civil military operations. So basically, they are yet to be fully involved or intensively involved in active field-based operations. From this, it also stems that the involvement of women peacekeepers is more indirect. Since the contingents engaged in peacekeeping operations are from other countries, it is also imperative for the peacekeepers to establish a rapport with the local population in order to reduce confrontation with the local population and also help in rehabilitation. In such operations, the trust factor plays a major role, and in the case of women and children and even men affected by sexual violence, assault, exploitation, it becomes extremely important for the peacekeepers to be able to develop trustworthy relationships with the local populace, and in this, women peacekeepers can definitely play an important role. Now there is another angle to this whole issue of increasing the number of women peacekeepers in peacekeeping missions. Male peacekeepers of the United Nations have often been accused of human rights violations in their areas of deputation, and particularly gender-based violence. Sexual abuse and violence includes not only rape but also sodomy, instances of verbal sexual abuse, rape, support of prostitution, forcing women and young girls for survival sex, among others, and forced sex, of course. Now, survival sex, here it is worth mentioning, is the sex that a person is forced to engage into in return for food items or other such basic amenities. And such accusations against male UN peacekeepers have emerged from places like Haiti, Liberia, Sierra Leone, Bosnia, Cambodia, East Timor, Democratic Republic of Congo, and even Bosnia and Kosovo. In fact, in the year 2008, a report that was published by a UK-based organization called Save the Children revealed how members of peacekeeping mission of the UN peacekeeping missions in Haiti had often conducted themselves inappropriately towards young girls, including forcing them or luring them or tempting them to have sex in return for money or other basic amenities, that is, for forced sex. And often the girls and young ladies and women were threatened, and even children were threatened or intimidated so that they did not report these issues or these cases to the authorities. Similar accusations emerged from Sudan too, among other places. Now, it is important in this context to understand that forced sexual encounters of this sort leave behind a large number of pregnancies and childbirths in their wake. And afterwards, there is every possibility that not only would the women victims be stigmatized by their own societies, but also that the fathers would refuse to accept the children or abandon them. This, in turn, pushes women and their children often towards prostitution or survival sex and make them vulnerable to sexual violence and trafficking. UN peacekeepers have also been accused to have knowingly stayed away whenever there was sexual violence on women and children by armed militants, often as a political tool or as a war tactic. But it is also important to understand the reasons why such atrocities on the part of the UN peacekeepers. However, it is important to understand the reasons why such atrocities conducted by UN peacekeepers are either unreported or they go unpunished. And this, in fact, is one of the biggest limitations also, because firstly, the peacekeepers are recruited by the member states, and therefore they are under the jurisdiction of their native countries. Secondly, troops that join a peacekeeping unit are traditionally given jurisdictional immunity through the status of forces agreement. And this again, a kind of emboldens male peacekeepers to engage in sexual exploitation and assault. Also, thirdly, sexual abuse by a UN peacekeeper has to be reported by the commander of the peacekeeping force. Now, if the commander himself turns a blind eye to that or is complicit in the whole act, then definitely the victims would go without any justice. It is in this context that it becomes so important to increase the number of women peacekeepers in the peacekeeping missions. Women peacekeepers not only bring in a different perspective to the plight of women trapped in a conflict situation, but also they can instill trust, faith, and a sense of security in women and children victims. And of course, it goes without saying that the female perspective is not only different from the male perspective, but it can be striking at times. To conclude, we have to understand that UN peacekeepers are the custodians of peace and security. And as the potential custodians of peace and security, UN peacekeepers can play a significant role in preparing the ground for social and economic upliftment of a strife-filled society or a strife-ridden society. For this, of course, the safety concerns and the psychological, physical, emotional needs of women, victims, and women combatants, ex-combatants is of utmost importance. If peacekeepers themselves become a threat to the safety of women, whether young or old, then no amount of resolutions or no amount of laws can help salvage the conditions of women in conflict areas. Since women affected by domestic and sexual violence have their distinctive emotional, biological, psychological scars to handle or deal with, and since the scale of violence and assault on women in conflict zones has only multiplied with the passage of time, it has become extremely essential for the United Nations peacekeeping missions to ensure greater, more intensive and better participation of women in peacekeeping operations worldwide. Thank you.